Hello everyone, this is Dove again. Welcome to part 3 in my video series about how to make homemade lotions and creams. Make sure you watch parts 1 and 2 for this one to make sense. So what I have here is my water bath. I spoke wrong in the last video, I think, or in the first video. It's not really a double boiler that I'm doing, or emulating, it's a water bath. I've got my cups down into the pan, and I set them down into the pan, and then I poured the water and a splash of vinegar in there. And you have to do that because if you add too much water and you set your cups down in there, the water will just overflow out of your pan. I've had that happen, so ask me how I know. So it's better just to set your measuring cups and your jars down into the pan and then add as much water as you need. And I like to get it up as high as I can so that it's pretty well submerged, so that it's not taking forever to heat up. So that's my little electric burner I'm going to be using. This is the water portion. It's got my herbal infusion in it and all my other water-based ingredients. And then this in my canning jar is my oil portion. You can see it's all gloopy and stuff. The little white pearls are the little beads of vegetable e-wax, and then that clump there is my butter, lanolin, and my lecithin. Everything that's oil based goes in here. And so this actually takes quite a bit of temperature to warm up, and warm up enough to melt all of that. And then unfortunately it gets too hot, and so I have to take the jar out of the water and let it come down to the temperature I want, which is, for both of these, about 98 to 100 degrees. And that's really important. You have to have these at the same temperature. That's really important. The oil and the water has to be at the same temperature before you can combine them. And you don't want them too hot. So, if this heats up to 130 or 140, I have to wait for quite a while. I have to take it out of this bain-marie or water bath and let it cool down. And this is obviously not as thick as the oil, and so it's going to heat up at different times, and it will cool down at different times too. So this is actually the hardest part of making handmade lotions and creams, is getting these temperatures to sync up just perfect. The stars have to align here. And so right before I mix these two together, I'll be adding my essential oils. Those are the ones that I use. So I've got my hot pad here with a paper towel, because I always have to, ferry these in and out of the water, and I don't want to get water everywhere, and so I keep paper towel down here. I actually go through quite a few of these half sheets. I think probably at least a dozen or so, because when I'm measuring things out, like these are my measuring cups. This was what I weighed the e-wax out in, and this is what my butter and lanolin and stuff was in, and this is what my water-based ingredients were in. Anything that has to be weighed out, I weigh them out in these little cups. But I don't want to cross-contaminate anything, so after I'm done with each one, I'll wipe it out completely with a paper towel. And the same thing for my measuring cup, because I measure out my oils and some of my water-based ingredients in here, and you cannot mix those together until at the very end when you're mixing them together. So you have to keep this contaminant free. So every time I switch from a oil-based to a water-based, I clean that out really, really well. And most of the time all it requires is a paper towel. And actually, when you're measuring out stuff like that real thick, gloopy lanolin and the lecithin, and even honey, well, not so much with the honey, but definitely with the lecithin and the lanolin, I use a knife to scoop them out of the jar. They're pretty hard. Well, the lecithin is liquidy, so I use a spoon for the lecithin and a knife for the lanolin in my butters. And I've actually, when I first started out, I would just throw this into a sink full of hot soapy water thinking that it was all just going to melt off and be all nice and wonderful, but that's not how it worked out. I mean, after 2 hours of soaking in hot soapy water, the knife would still be coated with lanolin, and sometimes this would be coated with lecithin still, and it was really weird. So I figured out that it's actually easier to clean it if you just preliminarily wipe it off with a paper towel, and then I can go in, take them in the kitchen and clean them with hot soapy water. So those are the 2 utensils I use, besides some measuring spoons and everything. The oil in here, that's actually 12 different oils. It doesn't look like 12 oils, but that's because, you know, there's a really small amount of each oil. And so I think the total oil was about 2 ounces. And then I have an ounce of the e-wax and almost an ounce of the other solids. And then the water portion came up to be about 10.5, almost 11 ounces. So those are the proportions that you would want to use if you were trying to get the texture and the creaminess of the overnight cream that I'm making. And these are the jars that I put the lotion in, or the cream in, when I'm done. It's supposed to hold 3 ounces, but by weight it's only about 2.5 ounces. It depends on how fluffy your cream is. And so I'm going to go ahead and start my water bath here. I'm used to doing this on gas, so I'm just kind of experimenting with my new electric burner, but I'll turn it up pretty high, but I won't have to keep it up that high. Oh, and this is how I'm going to keep track of the temperature of the water portion and the oil portion. This is a DigiSense, and I've actually used a couple other digital thermometers and they were junk. This is by far the nicest one. It's a little bit hard to use because, whoops, don't stick it in the water. It reads upside down. You have to get it within like an inch or two. As you can see, it's upside down. So that's a little inconvenient, but it's alright. This is the scale that I use. Sorry about the shadow. This is the one that measures or weighs out in 0.05. So even though this is a cheap scale and I don't really like it, I like the fact that it goes down to 0.05. And then this is the stick blender that I will use. It's my Cuisinart. It's the old style Cuisinart, which I really like. The new ones have the safety feature on top, and it makes it almost impossible to use it one-handed. They put a button on top that you have to push, and then you have to push these buttons at the same time, and it's actually not very user-friendly. They did it because probably somebody got stupid and hurt themselves using one of these, and so everybody else has to pay for it now. I'm glad I have this old one that doesn't have that new child lock, whatever, foolproof lock, whatever you want to call it. Alright, so hopefully this video won't be too long. It's already 9 minutes in, so I have a feeling it's probably going to be another half an hour long video, and I apologize for that, but there's a lot to go over, and you're actually being spared a lot of waiting time and everything, because I'm just going to skip this. I'm going to skip filming this. I'll bring these up to temperature. I'll get this up to a temperature that all of that's melted. And I may do a clip, once everything's melted, I may do one short clip just to show you the temperature of this oil and of the water. And then I'll turn off the camera again and let this stuff cool down, because again, it takes Sometimes it could take an hour or more just waiting for this to come up to temperature and then go back down, and then to try to get the two at the same temperature. So that's your third challenge, you know. So it can actually take quite a bit of time, but it's worth it in the end. So I'll see you in a bit. Alrighty, so it's been about 10 minutes and my oil portion is warmed up enough that all that e-wax has melted. I just took its temperature and it's almost 149 degrees, and this one is, I think, 126. Let's check it again. You hold it about an inch or two away from your surface. 124. Yeah, it's fluctuating, but it's still way lower than this one. And so without getting any of this water into your water portion, I take it out and I just tilt it and let some of that water drain off, and then I go immediately to my paper towel here with my hot pad underneath. So this is way too hot, and unfortunately this takes a lot longer to cool down than the water. And so what I'll do is just keep this on a warm, and I'll keep that in there, because if I were to take this out at the same time I took that out, I would have to reheat this. And so it's better just to keep this in the hot water bath and pull the oil portion out and let it start cooling. And because there's such a small amount in the jar, it shouldn't take too awfully long, but you never know. Oil stays hot for quite a while. And usually, like when I said, you know, sometimes it can take an hour, that's because half the time I'm just in and out and I'm doing other things. I'm always multitasking. And so yeah, it can take me about an hour, but normally maybe, you know, if you were very attentive and constantly like stirring this to cool it down and always taking both the temperatures and trying to keep them in sync. And so that's what I try to do. You know, if this one is too hot and this one's getting too cool, then I pull that one out of the water bath and I'll sit them side by side and let them start cooling at about the same temperature. And if it starts getting too cool before that one cools off, I'll stick them back in the hot water bath. It's a huge juggling act. So I just wanted to show you that. And so hopefully the next clip, these will both be at the same temperature, and I can add my essential oils and my oil-based extracts that I haven't actually gotten out of my box yet. I will add those to the oil portion and we'll blend this all up. Okay, see you in a little bit. Okay, so I just wanted to show you that my water portion, I just took it out. It reached 134 degrees, so it continued to climb in there. And this, when I took its temperature, was also about 134. So right now they're about the same temperature, but they're still way too hot. So just to make it expedient, you can sit here and you can stir it, both of them, and keep taking the temperature of both of them. And if one of them's getting off, then go ahead and put either one of them, whichever one's getting off, put it back in the hot water bath until you get down to about 100 degrees, and then you can blend them both together. So I just wanted to show you that. That's actually a really hard jar to stick this down into. You have to stick your whole hand down into the jar, so it's really hard to get its temperature. But it's a good jar for blending the lotion in, or the cream, so I just have to put up with it. Let's check his temperature right here. 126. I don't know if I can show you this. And you have to get your spatula out of the way, which is really hard to do one-handed, so I'm not going to be able to do that. But I'll take its temperature here in a minute after I turn off the camera. So you kind of have to hold, with one hand you have to hold the spatula out of the way so that you make sure that you're taking the temperature of the actual oil and not your spatula. So it's good to stir it right before you take its temperature and then move your spatula out of the way. Oh, and that's the other thing I wanted to mention is these two different spatulas. The reason I'm using two is because, again, you cannot get the water in the oil or the oil in the water until it's time. So you have to use two different spatulas, and I just keep one in the oil and keep one in the water, and I don't ever mix the two together. Okay, see you in a few. Alright, so here we go. It is time. Both my oil and my water portion are at about 100 degrees. And, oh, sorry about that. What I wanted to show you is, you can see here on the jar that once it starts cooling down, if you have stuff adhered to the jar, if you don't have it scraped down, it's going to start hardening on the sides, and so you need to keep that scraped down and keep it into the oil. And the reason why you can't go below like body temperature is because this will just start hardening and then you can't use it. And so there's a very fine line to where you can mix these two together. And I've been going back and forth because one would get too hot and then the other would get too cool. And so it's just a bit a balancing act. I had to put this back in. We're at 96, and this, when I checked just a second ago, it was at 99. And I've already put my oil-based extracts and my essential oils into here, so everything's ready. You want to wait until this gets at least, about 100 degrees, and then you can add those delicate essential oils. And so actually I'm just kind of waiting for this to warm back up, or, well, warm back up, because really you don't want this one to go below 98. So I'm at the critical point right here. And so it's possible that I will have to put this back into the hot water bath to get it up to speed and to match it with the water. And sorry about the sound. If you hear popcorn sound, that's rain hitting my metal roof. So I am going to set you guys down and show you how I mix this together using my little immersion blender. And this I add, you'll see me adding it at the end. And this is acacia powder, and I just use a little tiny bit just to help with the smoothness and the creaminess of the finished product. Alrighty, let me set you down here. Alright guys, here we go. I finally have my water portion and my oil portion at pretty much the same temperature. Believe it or not, but I've spent the last 10 minutes solid trying to make this happen, because once one would get the perfect temperature, the other one would be out of temperature, and it's just a back and forth. It's a huge balancing act. And for the oil portion, again, you have to make sure that the sides are scraped down, and I use my knife to scrape the spatula all the way down, and then I scrape off the knife with the spatula. It's like you want to save all of it, and so you do what you can to keep it all down into that oil. Alright, and then the water is about the same temperature right now. So what I have to do is get this spatula out of the way. I already put my stick blender together. It's a two-piece deal. I'm going to stir this up one more time. Like I said, I've already put the essential oils into my oil portion. And so what you want to do is put your stick blender down into the oil and start blending, and then slowly add your water portion, okay? I'm going to turn that off, and I'm going to add my acacia powder. It's really thin and liquidy right now, but it will thicken up. Alright, I'm not sure how much of this you can see from that far away, but that's lotion. Well, actually it's cream right now. It's very, very thin, but as it cools off, it will thicken up. And this is a huge mess. But it's actually not as messy as if you were to use your food processor. So I still recommend this handheld blender over the food processor, unless you're making large amounts. So as you can see, that expanded. And so we've got a lot in the jar here. If I were making my full batch, I would have to use my food processor because this jar is just not big enough. And unfortunately, when you stick your silicone spatula down in there, you risk cutting it on the blade there. So you just have to try to scrape as much out as you can without cutting your spatula. And there is some waste. There's really no way around it. I mean, I'm not going to stick my finger in there, you know, to get that lotion out of there. So that will be wasted. But I just try to get as much off as I can. And then it's going to want to separate a little bit in the beginning. And so just stir it in there. Alright. So in the interest of saving editing time, I think I'm going to go straight into portioning it out. I'm just wiping down the sides because it's really messy. Oh, sorry. I guess I'm not going to do that. Hold on.